So, my name is Paul Rascagneres. I work for the G-Data Security Labs, and more specifically on malware analysis of targeted attack, or more or less every cool stuff. And I'm not only malware analyst, I make some private article about radio frequency hacking, or how to open a physical safe on the hotel when you are boring, and this kind of stuff. So I think everybody is wake up, everybody is ready. I am going to make a talk about 1 hour of assembly language. No, I'm just kidding. No, in fact, I'm going to present a few tools used by what I call Uroburos actors. So it's more or less the planning. So we work on this group since more than 1 year, and we are able to create a kind of timeline of tool. We think it's developed by the same guys or same groups. Why? Because sometimes they copy-paste some part of code. They use some same encryption keys, etc. I will speak about this fact after. So I'm speaking about a group that started to work in 2006. So I'm speaking about a group that worked basically since 10 years and in offensive topic. So in 2006, we found something that called agent BTZ here. And a few years after, they make some evolution on it and create something called Carbon, or sometimes it's called Cobra. It depends of which security company is picking. You will see it's really complicated because for same malware, generally we have at least 5 names. And Uroburos, or Snake, or Turla, or etc. It's the same sample. So I will present each project, functionality, how it works, etc. And at the end, I will speak about attribution, because I must speak about attribution, but we will see it's not so easy. So the first case is agent BTZ and Comrade. In fact, if you look here, it's for me the same malware, but during the first year, the evolution was really slow. It's only patching and small features, etc. And in 2013, they changed more or less half of the malware, so that's why we decided to rename it, but it's really in the continuity. So here is a number of samples we identify during the last year. So we can see it was really used in 2007, and the number of samples decreased, and it reappeared in 2012, and in fact it's the Comrade version of the malware. Here I created a small array to show you the evolution. So the percentage you can see is the difference between 2 versions of the malware. Because in this case, developers put a versioning on it. So I can easily say it's this version and this one, etc., and make some bin diff between 2 versions. So we can see at the beginning the difference is 10% of the code is different, etc. And here we have a big difference. 60% of the code is similar. It's the switch from agent BTZ to Comrade with new functionality, and they change the compiler too. So if you change compiler, the binary will be different. That's why it's so different. And after, the percentage are really, the difference are really small. So the 1.5 version was used against US Pentagon in 2008, I think, something like that. You can read a lot of paper about this topic. And here it's when agent BTZ becomes, from our point of view, Comrade. So on few binary, not whole binary, the developers forgot to remove the compilation path. So we can see the internal name of the project is Chink. or Jinx 64 for 64-bit version. So the feature of this malware are really common. It allows you to execute command, download file, upload file, etc., etc. All the requests are performed in HTTP. And on the first version of AJAR-BTZ, the developers implement a USB media infection thanks to the autorunts enabled by default on Windows XP. So when an infected machine, when someone connected a USB key on an infected machine, it automatically creates an autorun file. And when the USB key was connected to another one, it was automatically executed and automatically installed. So Microsoft removed this feature on 7, and it's not enabled by default. So the developers decided to remove this functionality because it doesn't work anymore. So just for information, for the US Pentagon case, if you read on the press, visibly, someone found the USB key on the where they parked the car, take it and plug it inside of the US Pentagon. And that's how the first infection was performed. So, on the last version of Comrade, the developers implement a new trick to become persistent, because of course every malware generally want to start automatically on the reboot of the system. We can use some tools like sysinternals, autoruns, or other tool to list every program started at when the system starts. And in this case, to not appear on the list of executed program, the malware use COM object. So in Windows, everything is COM object. And they create a COM object with the same name than an existing one. And it's thanks to this trick, when an application uses this legitimate COM object, it's not the legitimate code that is executed, but the DLL installed by the attackers. So with this trick, for the moment, I didn't see any tools that list COM object created and COM object executed during the boot or during execution of legitimate binary, etc., etc. In this case, they hijack the functionality used to increase the contrast of the window. Basically, it's not used by a lot of people, and they can hijack it, and if it doesn't work, it's not a big problem because nobody really uses it. Another interesting case, on every sample from the beginning to today, it's always the same XOR encryption key you can see there. So, and this key was used on every case, basically. So, it was for the first one. The first one is really simple to analyze. It's old product, and it works in userland. It's create one thread, extra. It's really, they don't use a big obfuscation, extra. The second one, so created a few years after, is Cobra or Finet, it depends which company. And this one is more complicated, and they use some really funny tricks to complexify the analysis and to complexify the detection of the malware. For example, they use a legitimate file to set configuration. So on Windows system, you've got a inf directory with a lot of inf file, and on one of these legitimate file, the malware add a stanza with configuration. So you have this file, you must have this file, but he simply add at the top of the file its configuration. In this case, it explains that the root directory of the malware is in accessories en US. And this directory is generated randomly when the malware is installed. So on every machine, you will have a different directory, and on every machine, a different inf file will be used to store this configuration. how this malware works. In this case, it's more complicated. The malware is divided on 3 parts. You've got in one part the orchestrator called system by the developers. And this one is you stay in background and he used to handle requests. In the other part, you've got the payload, and this one is called users by the attackers, and it generates requests to the orchestrator handles the request, and give results to the payload. So the design is more complicated, and they have a configuration file too to avoid putting configuration in the binary. So in this case, they use encryption to store configuration, and I copy here an example of configuration. So you've got object, it's simply an ID to identify the machine. You've got iproc is the processes list where the malware will be injected. In this case, the malware is injected into Internet Explorer, Outlook, MSN, Firefox, Opera and Chrome, every browsers and email client. And here you've got an exclusion list where the malware will not be injected. So the other part of the configuration concerning a network. So it's a command and control used by the malware. So here we've got 4 command and control. One is located in Iran and one in France, and I don't remember for the other one, but it's not really important. So when the malware wants to exfiltrate data, he used randomly one of this domain, and if the domain is down, it switched to another one. So basically, if you blacklist only one domain, it's like if you do nothing. The other part of configuration is a transport protocol. It's how the orchestrator speaks with the payload injected into browsers. In this case, it uses a name pipe, and the name pipe name is a comnap here. And something really useful for analysts, they provide a versioning. So we are able to create timeline and to know which version is used, extra. So for the system, so the payload injected, for the orchestrator, it's 3/61, and for the payload, it's 3/62. Yeah, something really useful too, from my point of view, they create a log file. So it was encrypted, but once you decrypt it, you can have every action performed on the machine. Typically, you've got a slide with the definition of each letter, but you can see when the malware is started, stopping, etc., in which process it's injected. For example, here we can see it's injected in explorer.exe. You can see the web request. Here, for example, you've got web request. You can see when the malware is sleeping, etc., etc. Basically, you can trace all the activity, and you can see when the malware was installed, because the oldest log is when the malware is installed, etc., etc. So it's a more complicated design, but the purpose is exactly the same as previously. Code execution, file downloading, file uploading, and they have a plugin management system. So they are able to push library and, for example, to have, I don't know, a keylogger feature, or to be able to switch on microphone, or I don't know, everything is possible. And they have an efficient plugin system. Yeah. So Cobra, or Carbon, or whatever the name, is what we call a userland-centric snake, because we will see after the author often use image of snake to name their malware. So in this case, we have 2 components that spoke together in userland, and one used to handle everything, and the second one used to exfiltrate data, used to steal information in the browsers, etc., etc. The last version we know about this group is Uroburos, snake, or Turla malware. In this case, it's always a snake, but in this time, they decided to switch from user land to kernel land. So the malware is not running as previously with the user's context or stuff like that, but it's executed in the driver as on the kernel as a driver. And thanks to this choice, they are able to make more interesting stuff. For example, they are able to hook, to modify the behavior of internal function of Microsoft. They are able to create a DPI monitor. They are able to make some filter on network to be able to catch directly information on the network flow, basically. And to do that, they had to bypass some kernel protection put in place by Microsoft, I will explain after. And something fun, they use a virtual file system. So you cannot see it, it's not mapped on drive, but in fact they have an NTFS file system mount in memory, and they are able to put file, get file, extra, like a kind of SAS. So why Uroburos? It's a reference to a Greek word that it's a snake that eats its own tail. It's like the draw. And it's strings hard-coded on the binary. It's Uroburos got you. So it's a name chosen by developers. So the malware is composed of two files, the driver first, and that file, it's the virtual file system I mentioned before. It's an encrypted one. So just some tricks they use on kernel side. So first, when the malware is loaded, the first thing they do is to remove the beginning of the binary. You can see this program cannot be in DOS mode. So it's basically the beginning of the Windows binary. But at the beginning, you've got only 0 here. They simply replace the beginning of the loaded driver by 0. Why? Because I think if we have people from incident response team here, you use often volatility, I think, to analyze memory dump. And typically, volatility is looking for the beginning of strings. He's looking for the MZ stuff. So if you use volatility on an infected machine, volatility didn't see the loaded driver, because he's looking for the pattern of the beginning of a binary. And in this case, it's null, so the tool will never see the loaded driver. So after the publication we made about this topic, volatility patched the binary, and now he's able to detect it even if the beginning of the binary is wiped in memory. Another trick, they use pull tag ID NTFS, and it's a legitimate pull tag ID used by the NTFS driver, the real one. And WinDBG, for example, trust this file and say to you, oh yeah, this driver, don't care about it, it's NTFS driver, simply because the author chose the same name. Yeah. So if you list every driver on the infected machine, you can see a driver with a name null. So it's our bad malware, bad driver. And if you look every object linked to this driver, you can see something called FWPM callout. It's in fact network mini filter. I will speak about that after. And you can see raw disk one. Raw disk one is the part that handles the virtual file system loaded in memory. So, one interesting thing is that the malware performs some hook on interesting internal function of Microsoft. To perform this task, the malware had an interruption at the beginning of function. For example, at the beginning of the IO create device function, you've got int C3, And normally you don't have that. The malware modify the beginning of the function in order to generate an interruption and execute its own code instead of the legitimate one. So, well, it's not very interesting. Here you've got the code of the malware. I create a small Python script to list every hooked function on an infected machine. I simply take every function and look if I've got an int at the beginning. If I got this interruption at the beginning, it's a hooked function. It's not so complicated. And here you've got all function hooked by the malware. So basically, the malware modifies the way of how Microsoft Windows handle a registry, process, driver, file system, extract. So when you try to list file on a specific directory, Explorer asks to Windows what kind of file I've got here, and Windows automatically jump on the malware code. The malware code decided if he wants to show you or not the file in the directory, and go back to Explorer, and you've got the output. So basically, I spoke about a virtual file system, .dat file, and the hook function I use to hide this file. If you go on the directory, you cannot see the file. Even if you use process Explorer or MS-DOS or what you wish, every tool will show you no file. It's the same for the registry used to automatically start the malware, to load the driver at the boot. It's the same thing. If you go on the registry and you see, you try to see if the key is here, you will not see the starting key. And it's the same thing for a lot of stuff. So you cannot trust an infected system. You must take a memory dump and analyze the memory dump of the infected system on the clean system. So, what is the Windows filtering platform? It's API provided by Microsoft to creating network filter. In this case, the malware creates a kind of deep packet inspection, and he's able to sniff the network and looking for specific pattern. Yeah. For example, it was used on name pipe, and when a machine tried to connect to a name pipe on the infected machine, the malware look at the network, and when he sees a specific pattern, he say, "Oh, yeah, I've got an order. I need to do something." And yeah, here it's how the malware detects the order. He's looking for a specific string in the network flow. If he has this specific string, he knows that I got an order after, and I need to do something. So it's completely passive. The malware don't ask order, he's waiting to receive order. So the other interesting part is the virtual file system I mentioned. So the fun thing is it's mapped, it's mounted in memory. You cannot access it by your Explorer, but you can access it by MS-DOS. If you do dir space //dot/hd1 /, you can see all the files stored in the virtual file system in memory. So all the tools used by the attackers and temporarily put in this virtual file system can be listed thanks to this trick. So on the case I worked on, I saw a Q file. I will mention after what is a Q file, log file, and additional tools such as RAR to compress data, pass the hash tool, dump the hash tool, etc., etc. So it's really a common reconnaissance tool. Yeah. So in the virtual file system, I don't know if you can read, but you can see a Q file and a KT log file. It's the log file and the Q file. And the Q file is encrypted too and contains configuration CC configuration, for example, and it contains DLL. And in fact, the rootkit, the driver, does not directly communicate to internet. He injects a DLL in userland, in the browser typically, and this DLL in the browser will contact the CC on the internet. So it's the same kind of design that previously. Previously, we had an orchestrator and payload, and we have exactly the same thing, but the orchestrator now is in kernel. So it's simply an evolution of Cobra. The design is more or less the same. Yeah. So, yeah, the injected DLL on the browser is used like a proxy, in fact. The kernel said to your browser to go to internet. Your browser receives a request and sends to the kernel the order or what he has to do. The DLL was named by attackers inj for injection, underscore snake underscore win32.dll or win64, of course, I copy paste. And the communication can be performed in HTTP, so it's directly a web request performed by the browsers, but the communication can be performed thanks to SMTP, ping, etc., etc. So it's really modulable, and the attackers can configure how you want. So I explained that it's a driver loaded in memory that hook function, etc., etc. But Microsoft did a lot of work to avoid this approach. So directly, it's impossible to add the interruption C3 at the beginning of the function. If you do that on Windows 7 64 bits, the system crashed. Microsoft preferred to suicide your system than doing that. So normally, it's not possible to do that. In this case, the malware simply create hook before the hook control. So he modifies the behavior of the hook control that check if hook are performed. So he simply does the task before and it works. So he modifies the key bug check X function to never say a hook is here. It always says everything is good, everything is good. It's a first trick. And they use another tricks. On Windows 7 64 bits, directly, you are not able to load a not signed driver. If the driver is not signed, you cannot load it. But if you are developers, you are able to switch your system in test mode and load your driver during development period, etc., etc. If you do that on your Windows, it's simply a command on MS-DOS. You will see at the bottom right a message that's explained to you are in testing mode. It's the screenshot I put here. So if an attacker wants to load an unsigned driver, he must switch in test mode, but the user is able to see this text and say, oh, it's weird. Normally, I'm not in test mode, something is wrong. In this case, the developers use a trick and use a legitimate driver to load the bad driver. So, how they did that? VirtualBox released a driver, I don't know, in 2008, so it's a really old binary. And VirtualBox is a legitimate tool, and it's signed by the company that created this tool. And of course, this driver can be loaded. But a vulnerability exists on this binary, on this old driver, and this vulnerability allows to switch to 0 an arbitrary memory address. And what the attackers do, they decided to switch the test mode from 1 to 0. So they are looking for the address of test mode enable, yes, no. And they switch from yes to no. So, and as the driver is signed and legitimate, the driver is able to do this task. And once they switch off the signature enforcement, they are able to load the unsigned driver after. Yeah, here it's step by step. Say load VirtualBox driver, use a symbolic link, etc., to switch off the signature enforcement. It's simply one line. Here it's how to do this task. It's simply one line of code to switch off driver signature. Something really interesting is the VirtualBox driver is presently expired. And it's expired since 3 years, something like that. But Microsoft doesn't support expiration of driver of certificate. So if you use certificate to sign driver and it's expired, it's no problem. Microsoft will load it. So it doesn't support expiration date. So it's one point. And the other thing is I never saw company that revoke certificate in case of vulnerability. I never saw that. Usually, a company revokes certificate only when the certificate is compromised, but not for each bug they had. And it's impossible to deal with this philosophy. So basically, it's another problem of the certificate ecosystem from my point of view. So, and the stuff about kernel signing driver protection is the first time we saw this approach on this malware. It's a new, it was during the analysis a new trick. And the Uroburos case included some other exploit too. So they have exploit to have administrator privilege to be able to install the driver typically, and they include a lot of exploit. So, concerning the command and control, I saw two kinds of CC. Dedicated server, from my point of view, only used by attackers to do the job, and legitimate compromised website. So, we have three kinds of malware, three quality of malware, and how the attackers work. Basically, they always work with the same approach. They start with an exploit on a legitimate website or spear phishing campaign to target entities. The first install malware is a reconnaissance tool called Whipbot of Tavdig. It's really a not important malware. The purpose is simply to infect the machine, get information, and select if the machine is relevant or not. If the machine is not interesting, the malware is cleaned and the machine is okay. If the machine is interesting, at this time, the author switch to a second malware. And the second malware is Cobra or Uroburos, depending of customers or targets. And for each infection part we saw, it's always the same modus operandi. Whipbot and Tavdig is typically to have information on the infected machine and to validate if it's interesting machine or not. So he take OS, he take host name, domain, because thanks to the domain we basically know who is infected, because every company have a domain with the name of the company. It's the same for government, basically. They get time zone to be sure the guy is in the good time zone, etc., etc. Once this first step is realized and they have access to a first machine, the next step is to compromise more machines in the infrastructure. And basically they compromise a lot of workstation, and they compromised internal server, and they compromised a server or two in border, directly connected to internet. Basically, the server in border is HTTP server, a website, or Exchange server. They compromise the Exchange server and to communicate to internet directly if they want, because it's connected to internet. It's work as designed. In the case I saw, the compromised server inside of the infrastructure were basically a file sharing server, Windows file sharing, because all the information, interesting information of company are located in file share server. And on the internet part, you've got CC managed by the attackers. So once they have this infrastructure in place on the targeted company, they use classic post-exploitation tools like Mimikatz. In fact, they take the source code of Mimikatz and add some feature as encryption of output, etc., etc. So it's exactly the same code with some obfuscation and encryption feature. They use pass the hash and pass the ticket tools. So at the beginning, they use pass the hash, but due to new security on company, etc., they switch to pass the ticket. So they use the Kerberos ticket on Microsoft to bounce from a machine to another one. And they use a custom PSExec binaries that use the hash or the tickets to make remote connection on other machine in the network. So something interesting is what kind of targets we have. So in 2008, we have US Pentagon. It's the first publicly known target by this group. So it's a Wikipedia article if you're interested. We published Uroburos case in February 2014, and we simply said that due to the complexity, we think it's targeted really important company or entities or government, because it's not a crimeware, typically it's too complicated. And 2 months after our publication, the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs publicly announced they were compromised by Uroburos. In August, after our publication, Kaspersky published their own analysis of what they call Epic Snake. And they mentioned that this malware target government embassies, military research organizations, pharmaceutical group. And in September, the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that they were compromised by this malware too. And we know a lot of other targets and other compromised entities or government, but it's not publicly available, so I don't mention them, but visibly the group targets a lot of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of a lot of different countries. So, attribution. And I suggest to come to our talk with Johan. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow. I don't. Today? Okay. Because we will speak about attribution and why it's not so easy. So, during analysis, we found usage of same encryption key, same file name, some malware. Uroburos check if AdJourBTZ is installed before installing itself, etc., etc. So we have strong link between each sample. And on 1 or 2 samples, the developers, we think, forget to remove the language used by the compiler. And the language used by compiler was Russian. And another thing is the username of developers. We found Vlad, Yurik, Gilg. I don't know, I know we have a Russian guy, maybe it will ring a bell for him. And, but as always, it's easy to modify username, and tomorrow I can make program with a Vlad username, so yeah. In 2011, a journalist from Reuters wrote an article about the compromission of US Pentagon, and he writes that the US government strongly suspects that the original attacks was crafted by Russian intelligence. So it's confirmed what we expect. And it was the same thing for the Belgium case. Journalist in Belgium explained that it's probably a Russian route to this case. So thanks for your attention. It's everything for me. If you have questions, feel free to ask.